I think I flicked it across. Hold on.
I hear it.
Are we good? Oh, there we are.
You might need to just scoot it up some. And,
Okay.
and that's the slide that's showing.
Right. I think we're good. Well, thank you, Kevin, for having me. It's been wonderful to get you know you. A little bit of an echo are we getting, or because when this preacher gets going, sometimes the volume just increases. So just be aware of that. When the preacher gets going. It's just a joy to be with you. I drove all the way down from Arkansas from this morning. So if anybody wants to fall asleep, it's me. I've had a good number of hours along the road already, but it's just a joy to be with you. We've been talking about this for some months, and I'm glad to finally get to meet you. I was in the Morrison Heights Church a couple of months ago. I did a Passover demonstration there during Easter week, and really enjoyed getting to know Greg and getting to know some of the congregation there as well. So this is kind of really seeing the cream then, is that right? The cream of Morrison Heights is just now here. And so it's a joy to be with you. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not from this area at all. I'm really from Texas. I have spent some time in Texas, and I spent some time in Illinois and in Miami and in Maine and wherever. Short answer to that question is I drive 30,000 miles a year, and so I cover a good portion of the United States on behalf of this missionary society. I better give you just a little quick history of myself and what I'm doing and what we do in Christian Witness to Israel, and then I'll give the longer version in the PowerPoint. I've been a regular pastor for 18 years in Northern Ireland. That's where the accent is from. I'm Scots-Irish. That's the best kind. I know everyone here probably has some Irish blood in them somewhere. Everywhere I go in America, oh, my great-great-grandfather was Irish. You guys hold to your Irish roots more than we do, probably. And St. Paddy's Day, you do more of the crazy stuff over here than we do back home. But I lived all my life in Northern Ireland. I come from Bangor, Northern Ireland, and I believe there's a Bangor up in Maine, and ours is the original one in Northern Ireland. My wife's from Belfast, which is like 15 minutes from Bangor, and no doubt you've heard of Belfast because of the news in the darker days of the 70s and 80s. I grew up in all of that, and thankfully I didn't lose anyone. I was close on a couple of occasions to a couple of shootings. Actually going into one of my university exams, as soon as the doors opened and we started to move in, two guys pushed past us all and started shooting. So we all hit the deck, and that was the closest I got to some of those uglier scenes in Northern Ireland in the 70s, 80s, a little bit in the 90s as well. But then we had wonderful days of peace. And the way we got peace in Northern Ireland, this is just your little history lesson, but the way we got peace in Northern Ireland was to put the bad guys into government. I'm tempted to say you put the bad guys into government first, but that's a political statement. But we put our terrorists in the government. That's quite literally what brought peace to Northern Ireland. And so the Deputy Prime Minister in Northern Ireland today was the number 2 of the IRA in the 70s. And several of the other politicians in the Belfast Parliament are ex-prisoners. Some broke out of jail, and some responsible for murders. And that kind of stinks to those who want some measure of justice. But that's where we're at in Northern Ireland. We're not bombing and killing each other anymore. Life is pretty much normal British life. And it's good that that's the case, but the two sides are still as far apart as ever. So the tensions remain, and the tensions simply remain as they do right across the board, right across the world. Ethnic tensions, racial tensions. And in Northern Ireland, it's Celtic Catholic Irish and Protestant Scots Irish. 50-50 on one piece of dirt, 100 miles by 100 miles. And that's what I grew up in. I would also want to tell you that Northern Ireland is the most spiritual part of Western Europe. In that 100 miles by 100 miles, like about a top quarter of the island of Ireland, there's about 1,000 Bible-believing evangelical churches. We are the most spiritual part of Western Europe. So there is a spiritual battle on there, as well as the physical tensions and the ethnic tensions. I grew up in that. I was a pastor for 18 years, but in 2004, I was invited to become the Irish director for Christian Witness to Israel. And I really knew very little. I had been supporting the work for 10 years previous, but I didn't really know the inside story. But the more I got involved and the more I saw the work of CWI, the more my heart grew and my passion grew and my burden grew. And I've been doing this for 12 years. I'm into my 12th year. And I've been here 3 years. When I was the Irish director, my daughter came over to Texas in 2004. My daughter studied at Texas A&M. She's an Aggie. Whoop. Anybody get that? If you do. And so I started to come over here also and do a little bit of short-term ministry. 3 weeks a year, I would come over and speak in a few churches. It started like Texas and Kansas and occasionally Mississippi, and so it continued. And really the burden that I had was that the church in the United States needs to hear about this mission. And what I've been doing full-time over here now for the past 3 years is really doing that, telling the church about Jewish mission, because it seems to me we've forgotten the Jewish people. And what I would want to tell you, and I'm sort of going to be flipping back and forward a little bit, and maybe what I'm saying now is going to be a repeat of what I say a little later, but we live in, for two reasons at least, I think it's important for Christian Witness to Israel to be here. We live in the most pro-Israel country on the planet. But we need to know why we ought to be pro-Israel. And we need to learn how to be pro-Israel. What is it that we need to do for Israel? Do they need F-16s, jets, fighter planes? Do we need to get them all back to the land to help them build the temple? What is it that they need? And so my burden is to teach the church what Israel needs, and also to teach the church that Israel is not a country over there, or wherever it is, but Israel is a people, and they're here. In fact, 42% of the world's Jewish population live here. 42%. So if we want to bless Israel, we need to start here. And we need to know what we're going to bless Israel with. What is it? It's the gospel. That's a no-brainer. It's what they need. They can have the land and be lost because they need the Lord. And people may wish to buy a tree for Israel, but they don't need trees. They need the one that died on a tree. So my concern is to get the church right across this great nation thinking about Jewish mission, real mission, and mobilizing the church, teaching the church, and helping the church to reach the Jewish neighbors that are all around us. There are not many in Jackson and the greater Jackson area, not many, but some. There are not many in Arkansas, but in a strange and wonderful way, the Lord has brought some across my path. But lots of the major cities in the U.S. have Jewish populations. Kansas City, 20,000. Dallas, 40,000. Houston, 50,000. Atlanta, 120,000. Miami, 660,000 Jewish people. And the largest population is in New York City, 2 million. There are about 7 to 8 million Jewish people here. and they don't know their Messiah. And we are so blessed. This book is Jewish. It's about a Jewish man, and it was written by Jewish writers, and it was brought to us in the first century by Jewish first century missionaries who believed in their Jewish Messiah. So my burden is, if we've got this, surely we must want to bring it back to those that brought it to us. Or are we so greedy? I've got this, I'll just keep it to myself. If we've been blessed by a certain ethnic group under God, we want to bless them. The way to bless them is with the gospel. Let me read a few verses. I do need to get into the PowerPoint, and I will. I'm covering a good portion of what I'm already going to say anyway. But just let me read a few verses from Romans chapter 10, well-known verses, and obviously on the whole issue of Jewish mission, these are crucial. And I commend to you reading, in fact, for your homework, read 9, 10, and 11 before you go to bed tonight. Romans 9, 10, and 11. It's all about Jewish mission. And in fact, it's the very climax of the book of Romans. It's the climax, the theological climax of Paul's argument concerning the gospel and what it is. And Romans 9, 10, 11 is the conclusion, in effect, of the theology, because in chapter 12 he goes, therefore I appeal to you, present your bodies as living sacrifices. That's chapter 12. So the therefore applies to all the grace and mercy of the gospel prior. And the Mount Everest, theologically, of the book of Romans is 9, 10, and 11, with 11, I suppose, being the peak. But I want us to dip in at Romans 10, 1, and I want to simply see, what does Paul want for the Jewish people? What is it what do we bless Israel with? What is the greatest blessing? I could ask you, what is the greatest blessing you have received? And surely it must be Christ. So if we want to bless Israel, it's got to be with the greatest blessing we have received. That's a no-brainer. And of course, that's exactly what Paul says in Romans 10. Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. They do have a zeal for God. If you see any Orthodox or observant Jewish people, this would be an Orthodox guy, the men in black, you might call them. And they will be very rigorous and very zealous in the things that they've got to do, because Judaism is a religion of works. It's a do religion. And Paul rightly identifies, I bear them witness. They've got a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Being ignorant of the righteousness that comes from God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. It's not of works, all of us. It's not of works, lest any man should boast. It is resting solely on the finished work of Christ, our righteousness. He is our Melchizedek, which is really Hebrew for King of Righteousness. And the Jewish people will not have Jesus as their Savior. They are hardened in their hearts. Some are coming to faith, and I'll tell the story of that a little later. Some of them are coming to faith in Jesus. But most of them will not accept Jesus. And they did not submit to the righteousness that comes from God, which is Jesus. And they're seeking to establish their own. Jewish people have a belief that our good deeds and our bad deeds are kind of like, well, it's like a scale. And let's see if we can get the good better than the bad. And if we can get the good a little higher than the bad, then God will be pleased with us. That's not the way God works. Young people, older folks, that's not the way God works. It's not getting your good deeds higher than your bad deeds. Jewish people have a belief that there's like a little angel on your shoulder and a little devil, like the cartoons. And you see this little angel and telling them, you should be doing this. And the little devils are, no, you should do this. That's a Jewish belief, really. The little angel, little devil. In Hebrew, it's the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara. It's the good inclination and the evil inclination. And the Jewish people simply believe that if I can listen to the good more than the bad, then God will be pleased with me. Isn't it interesting, again, if I can call in the young people just for a moment, the big thing at the moment is all the Avengers stuff and the superhero stuff. And strangely, my wife is into it and she knows more about it than I do. That's quite strange. I've just been so busy recently. Why is it that there is a longing in Hollywood for a superhero? Let me tell you why. Because Hollywood is overrun with Jewish people. The movie directors, the screenwriters, script writers. Hollywood is full of Jewish people. Where I identified where Jewish people live, it's usually East Coast, West Coast, mostly. So there's like 250,000 in LA. And so Hollywood is just overrun with Jewish people, and they want a superhero. They are longing for a superhero. His name is Jesus, but they won't have him. And in the emptiness of Jewish life that wants someone to set it all right, they won't have Jesus. I heard recently that a rabbi once said to a Jewish missionary, if I've got to believe in a son of God, I would rather have Thor than Jesus. And that is very sad. They need to hear about Jesus. And that really is our burden in our ministry. Well, I'm going to move to the slides eventually and try and get through them fairly swiftly. And we're going to try and turn the page, and hopefully this will work. The first point that I want to make is that belief drives behavior. Kevin and I have spoken a little bit about theology, and Kevin has studied at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and my two boys are students there at the moment. Now, I'm a Presbyterian. My two boys are Baptists. That makes for interesting dinner conversations, doesn't it? What did I do wrong? Maybe I did something right as a dad. They're having a wonderful, wonderful seminary life. Very, very busy. One's already done an MDiv. He's doing PhD, and the other one is halfway through his MDiv, the younger one. And we believe in substantial Christianity. In other words, we believe in teaching you the substance of God's Word. Because we believe that as we teach you substantial Christianity, your behavior will be affected. Belief drives behavior. And the shallow Christianity, which is pervasive in the United States, has led to a shallowness of Christian life. And so we very strongly believe in the importance of teaching the substance and bringing week by week food for your soul. And I'm grateful for the ministry that goes on here week by week, and we have an affinity of heart in these things. Now let me narrow the focus and speak about Israel then. Belief about Israel will drive our behavior towards Israel. What do we believe about the Jewish people? Do we believe that they're going to heaven anyway? There's a certain televangelist in San Antonio who believes that. I have quotes from John Hagee saying that Torah-observant Jews are already in covenant with God and do not need to come to the Messiah. In one of his books in 2007, he wrote that Jesus did not come to earth to be the Messiah. I'm sorry. That's heresy. But he believes in a dual covenant. In other words, there is a way for Jewish people and there's a way for Gentiles. And the Jewish people will get into heaven by the good deeds. And the Christian, or the Gentiles rather, need to come to Jesus Christ. That's heresy. The Apostle Paul went through every synagogue in Europe as he went on his missionary journeys, telling them it must be Jesus. There is no other name given among men whereby you must be saved. It's only by Jesus. So there are some that are peddling a heresy today. There are others that are saying, well, we just need to feed them. And you'll see another rabbi on the screen who's really not a Christian at all. He's a rabbi. And he comes on our screen and he tells us that we need to give $25 to help the Jewish people. Those poor Jewish people in Israel, please give $25 to our mission organization and we'll help the Jewish people in Israel. Do you know what his salary is? It's documented. His salary is 1.2 million. Same guy that you'll see on your TV screens. Now, there are heretics and there are charlatans. And I am so deeply saddened because little old ladies sitting at home who want to bless Israel are giving these guys their dollar and furnish them with a lavish lifestyle. I heard that $230 million a year is given to Israel-based ministries. I want a bigger slice of the pie. And I say that with all seriousness, because I want the dollar to go into real mission instead of into the pockets of heretics and charlatans. Belief drives behavior. What we believe about the Jewish people, are they lost? Yes, they are. So we need to bless them with the message of Messiah. And of that $230 million that's going to Jewish missions, most of it is not going to gospel ministries. And that saddens me. It's such a waste. And we are robbing widows' houses, or at least these charlatans are, when these little old ladies simply want to bless Israel. So my burden again is to get the theology mainstream, to, as I said earlier, restore to the radar Jewish mission, real evangelistic mission. Well, let me move on. The problem is that the church, let's see, we're up here. Yeah, I need to move on another slide. There we go. In the early centuries, the church lost its way with regard to Jewish mission. At first, the Jewish believers were just a sect within Judaism. They were followers of the way. Number of believers in Jesus, Jews. A lot of them that didn't believe. And so those Jewish believers, Paul and the apostles, were all reaching their own people. And then they went to Europe and they started to interact with Gentiles. And the church then became 99.999% Gentile with very few Jewish people. And the result of that is over church history, and it would take me several evenings to give you the sweep of church history, but basically what happened over church history was that the church forgot Israel and became anti-Semitic. And I have quotes from some of the early church fathers that are horrendous. I've got quotes by Martin Luther that are horrendous. But after the Reformation, and the Reformation was a process, after the Reformation, there was a growing restoration of an interest in the Jewish people. Samuel Rutherford, 1635. He was longing for the day when God would restore the Jewish people. In Romans 11, if you read it tonight for your homework, you'll learn that God is able to graft them in again. They're not lost completely. Have they stumbled to fall beyond recovery? Not at all, says the apostle. Their loss has been our gain. Their rejection has been our reconciliation. But that's not the end of the story, says Romans 11. There will be an acceptance. There will be a grafting in again of the natural branches, the Jewish people. And so at the Reformation, when there was a restored study of Scripture, instead of what the priests were saying, there was a restored understanding and a realization that God is going to do something for the Jewish people who don't know Him. Samuel Rutherford prayed that he would be kept out of heaven. Oh, may I see this day, lovely day. May it dawn. Thee and thine ancient people in mutual embrace. And Samuel Rutherford was part of the Westminster Assembly, which formed the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is the constitution of every Presbyterian church in the world. Sadly, many Presbyterian churches don't accept it, but it's their constitution, or it should be. And some churches, such as the PCUSA, have lost it on a number of fronts, and they're now divesting funds from Israel, etc., etc., etc. And so Presbyterians can get a bad name. I want to suggest to you that it was the Presbyterians that really started to bring some of these things back mainstream. Having said that, there are good Baptists as well. On the table, I have a couple of brochures. These are freebies. Robert Murray McShane, he's going to come up in our talk later, and Horatius Bonner. These were Scots Presbyterians. And McShane prayed the opening prayer at our first ever meeting in 1842. C.H. Spurgeon, the great London Baptist preacher, he preached for our mission on 4 occasions, did the annual sermon in London. And so we've got good Presbyterians and good Baptists on our side. But it was that Reformed theology instead of Roman theology that was restoring to the radar Jewish mission. And over to your shores, we have Jonathan Edwards. And he said, nothing is more certainly foretold than this national conversion of the Jews, when they shall be called, that ancient people who alone were God's people for so long, shall be his people again, never to be rejected anymore. So the burden was growing in the UK, the burden was growing across on these shores as well, and in the midst and mix of all of that, there was an increased theological awareness, there was an increased missionary endeavor, the 1700s, the 1800s, and Charles Simeon in Cambridge. He was an Episcopal, and he's there, the dates are there, and he believed that Jewish mission was the most important thing in the world. So we've got Baptists, we've got Presbyterians, we've got Episcopals, all believing these things, and he was asked in his day, what's more important? There are 800 million heathen in the world, and there are 8 million Jews. That was in his day. And he said, according to Romans 11:15, if the conversion of the 8 brings life from the dead to the 800, what then? In other words, he saw the importance of Jewish mission. He saw the importance of to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Some of you might know the name Hudson Taylor. Hudson Taylor, pioneer missionary to China. And Hudson Taylor, at the start of every year, would send a check to Jewish missions. And he would put in it a little note, Romans 1:16, to the Jew first. Now, he was the pioneer missionary to China, but he believed in Jewish mission theologically. The Jewish mission, interestingly, sent it back to him, sent the money back to him with a little note, Romans 1:16, and also to the Greek, and also to the Gentile. So the Jewish mission saw the importance of what he was doing. He saw the importance of what Jewish mission was doing, and so each were complementing the other. Charles Simeon saw that as well. Another quote, it's a lengthier one, but it's from Rabbi Duncan. He was known as Rabbi simply because he knew the languages so wonderfully. He wasn't a Jew, he was a Scots Presbyterian. And he's simply chastising his own people in Scotland. If we had only done this, if we'd only exerted ourselves on their behalf and been in prayer for them and furnished them with their own scriptures, there is reason to believe that the Lord would have commanded his blessing upon our endeavors. But in this part of the world, this quarter of the world, their interests have been totally disregarded. And I think he's a little harsh because in actual fact, it was the Scottish church that really got it and birthed modern Jewish missions. And so it was in 1839, the Church of Scotland sent 4 of its finest men to the Holy Land. What was it like to go from Scotland to the Holy Land in 1839? You didn't get on an El Al flight. You had to travel. They had to travel all through Europe and over through Egypt. And in fact, there was a little old lady in one of the churches of Andrew Bonner's. He was a little country parish church, and the little old lady was wondering, what is our pastor going to do? How's he going to get there? And the lady was told, well, he's going to travel all the way down through England. He's going to cross over to France, travel through Europe, and then come down into Egypt, and then travel up to the Holy Land. And she said, Egypt? He's going to go to Egypt? Ach, sure, we'll not see him again for about 40 years. I know you need subtitles for that, but basically what she was saying is that if he goes through Egypt, we're not going to see him again for 40 years. But what did little old ladies think about their pastor going off on a ministry trip to the Holy Land in those days? It was an amazing mission, but it arose out of the belief, you see. The belief drove the burden, and the burden birthed the mission, and it birthed our mission. And what was happening was, and I really will rush over a number of these things, but there were all kinds of things were happening among lay people, among women, among those who gathered funds, and a lot of theologians had some interest and some input into Jewish mission. And indeed, because England ruled the waves, or Britain ruled the waves, there was ease of travel. And because of the trading relations they had, the East India Trading Company, they found it easy to travel. They got papers from the highest authority to help them get to the Holy Land. And they came back from that trip to the Holy Land so burdened, and with a burden that would then be contagious around the church. Robert Murray McCheyne preached this sermon in 1839 upon his return. Our duty to Israel, and our duty to Israel is quite simply to bring the gospel to them. Now, Robert Murray McCheyne was 28. Actually, he was, let me just see what I've got up on the screen there. He was 28, and he would die at 29. Well, our mission began November 1842. And a few months later, Robert Murray McCheyne, age 29, the godly Murray McCheyne, as he was known, was gone. But not without burdening a church, a nation, and not without being instrumental in beginning a Jewish mission such as ours. And 170 plus years, we're now in the United States. I've been here almost 3 years. But that's our history, that's our heritage, that's our pedigree. But I want to, this is a really lengthy quote, but forgive me, but I think it is so important. And it's very small print there, so I'm going to come over here and read it. Societies may be formed, churches as such may enter into the field, sermons may be preached, inquiries may be made, information obtained, plans organized, funds prodigiously furnished, missionaries instructed and sent forth, institutions formed, Bibles and tracts distributed with the most abundant liberality, and discussions upon discussions held interminably. In other words, we can get it all right in terms of the organization. And if you want to read about such things, I commend these books. Mission of Discovery, that's basically the diary of the mission. And this is Scottish Missions to the Jews, 1838 to 1852. But all of those things are not enough. And so Rabbi Duncan said, the residue of the Spirit, he will not, all in vain without the Spirit of God. He will not give his glory to another. The residue of the Spirit is with him. In other words, we must pray for the Holy Spirit of God to come upon our labors. If I commend to you the Spurgeon sermon, this is the sermon on the Valley of Dry Bones. And if you know the story of the Valley of Dry Bones, the prophet is told, he's set in a valley, he's told, look at the valley, it's full of bones, and they're very dusty and dry and dead. But preach to the bones and pray for the wind. Now, what is happening is that we in our mission and ministry, and I trust as I nudge churches and individuals to reach their Jewish neighbor, we are preaching to bones. It's a hard mission field. We're preaching to people who are dead. In fact, tomorrow morning, or tomorrow lunch, I've got a meeting with a gentleman from Kosciuszko. He's a dear friend to a Jewish person of like 30, 40, 50 years, all their life even perhaps. This Jewish lady is dying of cancer. And he's been asking me, how do I tell her before she goes? This is our dear friend. We've known each other for decades, but she doesn't know her Messiah. So I've got some literature with me, and I'm going to have a meeting with him. She's unavailable at the moment. She's got chemo and she's not seeing anyone. Otherwise, I would have been very happy to visit with him. But he has a difficult task. What I can do is try and help him and help other people and teach and instruct sensitively how to reach your Jewish neighbor. But they're dry bones. But we must pray for the wind of God and pray that the Spirit of God will blow upon the bones. I have another Jewish friend that I met up in Ohio. And I was coming to this church. I had planned it like 6 months in advance. The pastor called me a month before I was due to be there. He said, Stephen, I need to tell you, there's a Jewish guy who has started attending the church. Just give you a heads up. And I said, that's wonderful. And he says, actually, he's quite liking my preaching because I preached from the Old Testament and he's loving it. And he's realizing that this is his history. Now, this man's wife is a Christian. When they got married as secular, they got married as atheists. She came to faith, and she's been working and praying and witnessing for her husband for a long time. And her witness really is what won him ultimately. And he came to know the Lord. And when I was there, he had already come to faith a few weeks earlier. And in some ways, I suppose some of the things I said confirmed some of the things that the Lord had already been showing him. But it was God's timing in it all. And he's now attending membership classes in that same church, and he's about to be baptized in a Presbyterian church, no less. We do baptize adults as well as babies. Kevin said I should tell you this one. It's just an aside from a Baptist church that I visit up in Kansas. And we have a little bit of banter back and forth because I'm Presbyterian, he's a Reformed Baptist. And he said, you know, the problem with the Southern Baptists is we're baptizing more babies than you. No, we're baptizing more children than you Presbyterians. That's what it was. And the reality is sometimes that there is the baptism too early. But that's another controversy. I'm not going to go there. But this Jewish guy is being baptized as an adult in a Presbyterian church in Ohio. So what is happening is that God, by his grace, is opening their eyes. In fact, that very Sunday, I was preaching on the veil being removed. And he said, I want to tell you when the veil was removed from my eyes. And I saw that it was Jesus. And it's just a wonderful thing to see a Jewish person come to a full understanding. And now he's realizing all his history and all his... And he called his mom up, and his mom's in South Florida. She's in her 80s. She's an atheist. Many, many Jewish people are atheists. He called his mom up and he said, Mom, I've come to know Jesus as the Messiah, as our Savior. And she said to him, are you converting then? And he said, yes, Mom, I am. And she said, I don't think it's a good idea. And he said, well, Mom, you know, I married a Gentile. You know, you were okay with that because you were liberal and reform and you were okay. And in fact, you got a gay rabbi to marry us. Yeah. He said, Mom, you were okay with our marriage. But, you know, it's the fulfillment. Jesus is the fulfillment in Moses and Passover and Exodus. And Jesus is the fulfillment. He's our Passover lamb. And her response to that as an 80-year-old Jewish lady in South Florida, she said, oh, that's all made up. That's all made up. It's very sad. We need to pray that the Spirit of God will blow upon the dry bones. I must make some further progress. Time is going by. I want to wave a couple more things at you, just as I'm going through. This is our international magazine, and this is our local U.S. supplement. So I just commend those to you. They're all on the table. If you want to get this regularly, 4 times a year, please sign up, and we'll get it to you. We can either get it in print or in PDF. I prefer it in print. I find if I get emails, I just delete them. If I get PDFs, I delete them because I haven't time. So my suggestion is get it in print. But whatever is good for you, please sign up. John Ross, in this book on Scottish missions, he said, towering over every other reason to engage in Jewish mission is gratitude. Gratitude. And I think that's really important for us Gentile Christians. This book is Jewish. This book has been given to us by Jewish people, not today's Jews, but 2,000 years ago and beyond. But today's Jews don't know their Jewish book. They don't know even their own scriptures, which is our Old Testament. And it just saddens us that they have gifted to us and they don't know it for themselves. You know, if someone does you a favor, if someone blesses you, I could go off on a major tangent and talk about how my daughter got over here to Texas A&M in 2004. She got the bug for Texas, and we got friends there, and they said, you really ought to go to Texas A&M, and she did. And we discovered that the costs involved were like 2/3 my annual salary. And I said, we can't do this. And a dear friend said, well, you know, we're in a small church. They were in a church of about 50 or 60. Let me put the word out among some folks, and maybe just we can gather a little fund together to help this little Irish girl come to Texas A&M. And so someone threw $100 in, and someone threw $200, and someone threw $500, and there was an occasional $1,000. And bit by bit by bit, there was enough oil in the jar to keep my daughter at Texas A&M for 4 years. There was 1 year where we nearly had to take a year out, and our faith was tested, but there was always enough oil. The Lord never failed us. And at the end of 4 years, I was privileged to stand in, the Reed Arena at Texas A&M and see my daughter graduate as a special needs teacher. And she's now helping other kids with difficulties get a little leg up in life, a little help in life. Now that family, in fact, there were a number of families. There were probably about a dozen families who all helped and chipped in just a little or more as they could. I will never forget what they did. What can I do for them? Well, I can't give them any money back, not that I have very much. I can't give much back to them. But I do know that some of their family is not believers. Some of their kids aren't believers. My desire so much would be for their kids to come to know Jesus. That would just be an amazing answer for them. And what I'm trying to say is that these Texan families who have so blessed me, well, what I want to do, I want to bless their kids with the gospel. The Jewish people of 2,000 years ago blessed us with this. Their kids today don't know this. And my payback is wanting to bless them with the greatest blessing that they brought me 2,000 years ago. Gratitude, really, should be our response, our duty. Very quickly, in 5 or 10 minutes, I just want to share with you that it's not an easy mission. We are seeing progress. In fact, in the past 20 or 30 years, more Jews have come to know Jesus in the past generation, in the past 20 or 30 years, than the previous 2,000 years. That's a fact, and that's a glorious fact. More Jews in the past 20 or 30 years have come to know Jesus than the previous 2,000. Something is happening. God is doing something amazing. There is a greater openness than ever before. But it's still a challenge. It's still difficult to cross over and make that connect. And so I'm simply going to put up on screen just some of our workers. And if you read in our magazine, and the back page is full of prayer requests. These are our workers all around the world. Our guy in Israel is David Zadok. He came to faith through the navigators. He's an Israeli. Came over here. Actually, he grew up in Iran, not a very safe place for a Jewish guy to grow up in the 70s. And he was sent out of Iran by his aunt and uncle, who sent him to the United States to study. While in the United States, then, he came in touch with the navigators, and through their ministry, he came to faith in his Messiah, Jesus. He went back to his home country, served in the army, rose through the ranks of the army, the Israeli army. He was a major in the Israeli army. Served 5 years in Gaza. But he felt a call to ministry. And so in 2003, he came back to the United States and went to Westminster Seminary West in Escondido, California. 2006, he graduated and became our main guy in Israel, heading up our work there as a pastor of a Reformed Baptist church, Grace and Truth Baptist congregation in Rishon, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv, and also heads up our publishing, Hagefen Publishing, translation of good works, good, solid Reformed literature, bringing it into modern Hebrew and translating and publishing. So that's a little bit of David's work. Our work in the UK, this is where it began, and so we've got a good team of workers there. In London, 200,000 Jews in London. In Europe, London's one of the biggest centers of Jewish people. Let's give you the stats again. 42% of Jewish people in the world live here. 45% of Jewish people in the world live in Israel. In fact, it was only about 5 or 6 years ago that number flipped, because it was the other way around, about 5 years ago. But now the majority of Jewish people live in Israel. Israel's the largest Jewish population. 45%, 42%. Next down the pecking order is France with 500,000. And after that is the United Kingdom with 300,000, 200,000 of which are in London. So these are our workers in the UK. We're also in Europe. Our mission began, some of it began in Budapest. We are also then in Budapest. And we're in Hungary there. We're in Bulgaria, in Sofia, and we're in France. Further afield, we're in Australia, South Korea, and New Zealand. And of course, we're in Arkansas. The center of the world Jewish... No, we're not in the center of the world Jewish population. Having said that, it's a long story, but a strange providence that I got called as an assistant pastor for this work 100%. So I don't have local responsibilities, although I do a little bit of work in the local Presbyterian church. But I was called to be the pastor for CWI. And so that's where I am. I'm situated there. Within a few months of me situated there, the Lord brought across my path a Jewish family. And by the grace of God and a lot of coffee visits and other things, I believe the lady and the husband have come to faith. The lady is much more the thinker than the husband. And she has been saying things that are just so wonderful. She disappoints me from time to time, and she still kind of flips to the synagogue. Well, I've got to leave that in the Lord's hands. But by the Lord's grace, again, I'm not in the center of the Jewish world, but the Lord brings it across my path. When you get interested in Jewish mission, be prepared for that the Lord just might bring a Jewish person across your path, even if there aren't very many Jewish people around. Within another month or two, I met another Jewish guy. He actually is the founder of Dayspring Cards. Some of you will know Dayspring Cards. And Roy Lesson is the founder of Dayspring Cards. He's Jewish believer. He lives 20 minutes from me. And we had a 4-hour cup of coffee. And we had a wonderful connect. And he told me his testimony. Let me give you 2 minutes of the testimony. His grandfather came over from Russia in pogroms. Then his parents and he were living in New York City, and things were going bad. The family decided to move out west. They moved to California. Things were still going bad. When Roy, who's now 66, Roy, the founder of Dayspring, he's now about 66. When he was a teenager, his father and the marriage was struggling. And he and his brother were also in the midst of the struggle. The father had had enough. The marriage was a mess. His business was a mess. The father decided, I'm going to end it all. I'm going to take my life. I'm going to kill my wife and my family. The father decided prior to that he would have a final fling in Vegas. And so he went, did the slots, and while he was doing the slots, he heard over his shoulder a voice, "You should not be here." He looked around, there was no one there. This is Roy Lesson's father. He kept playing the slots. "You should not be here." Now this guy was depressed, his business was a mess, his marriage was a mess. He went up to the room and he looked for a piece of paper he was going to write a suicide note and just end it all. He pulled open the drawer and he found a Gideon Bible. And he started to read. And he read most of the night. And when you check out of a hotel, you usually take, as my wife knows, that when I check out of a hotel, I take the soaps, I take the all the shampoo, and you take whatever's there. Well, when he checked out of the hotel, he took the soaps, he took the bathrobe, and he took the Bible. He says, I stole the Gideon Bible. And he kept reading it and reading it. And he came to faith through the influence of another Christian family, and that's another story. But Roy's father came to faith. Now the marriage then broke up because the Jewish lady would say, you've gone to the dark side. You Gentile. You've betrayed us. And you are not getting near my two boys. They're Jewish boys. You're not getting near them. Marriage broke up. The father kept praying for his two Jewish boys. Again, long story short, the two Jewish boys came to faith. One of them ended up serving as a missionary in Peru for the past 30 years. And Roy Lesson, again, long story, but he set up Dayspring Cards. And it's funny, in his testimony, and he shared it with me, he said, you know, Stephen, it's funny, but it really takes a Jewish boy to write a Christmas card. And he remembers that first Christmas card that they wrote as Dayspring Cards. And it was this: when you get right down to it, the only thing that matters is Jesus. And that's a wonderful testimony for any Jewish person. And so I was only in Arkansas a month or two, and I had met this unconverted Jewish lady who then came to faith. I met a Jewish guy who had come to faith a long time. And bit by bit by bit, and I'm helping the church in the local area as well as elsewhere, teaching the church how to reach their Jewish neighbor. So part of my ministry, we have this course. I've just finished 4 weeks in a local church doing this, connecting with the Cohens. We actually have 10 studies. I can do another 20 as we're building up resources of how to sensitively reach your Jewish neighbor. What can you say? What can't you say? How do you make the connection? How do you make friendships? What do you need to know about Jewish people today? Are they the same as Old Testament Jews? No, they're not. What do they believe today? What's the big stumbling block? What about church history? How is that? So I've got a ton of different resources and teaching seminars to help the church. My burden is to really do myself out of a job. I want the church to be reaching its Jewish neighbor. I want every church that's in a Jewish area to have an intentional Jewish ministry. And any church that's not in a Jewish area, I want it to have an intentional prayerful ministry for Jewish mission. And so we're reaching, we're teaching, we're equipping, and we're challenging. And we've got a frontline evangelist in South Florida, in the greater Miami area. Second largest Jewish population in the U.S. is in the Miami, and most of them, of course, are snowbirds from the north, from the New York area. And Michael is there as our frontline evangelist. I need to draw to a conclusion, really. I'm simply coming to you, asking for your prayers, asking that you'll pray for the dry bones, pray for the preaching to the dry bones, that you would support us at that throne of grace, and perhaps sign up, take a book. There's some books for sale there, and there's some literature for just taking with you. Please do take these things. We exist by faith. We exist by the gifts and the support of the Lord's people. But as I say, I'm not coming here just to get your dollar. I wish I could get so much more of that 230 million, yes, so that it would go into mission instead of going into the pockets of these charlatans. But I want to see the church mobilized prayerfully, practically, intentionally to reach the Jewish people that are here. And you know, they will be a blessing to us. One story and then I'm done. Robert Murray McCheyne, on his way home from the mission of inquiry, he discovered that certain things were happening in Scotland. Scotland was in revival on their way back home. His pulpit, the church in Dundee was just enjoying amazing God-sent revival. Now, we all like revival to happen when we're in the pulpit, don't we? We don't like it to happen when the guest preacher is here. But McCheyne was away for months, and while he was away, God was bringing revival to Scotland. And McCheyne simply believed that, as you'll read in here, as Genesis 12:3. Genesis 12:3 has been twisted and perverted and misused by the televangelists, so be careful. But Genesis 12:3 is, I will bless those who bless you. In other words, McShane saw that the Church of Scotland was blessing the ancient people. And God in his grace and sovereign mercy was blessing Scotland with revival grace. The televangelists would say, well, put your dollar in and your business will succeed. Won't you give to our Israel mission? And Genesis 12:3, I'll bless those who bless you, and buy this prayer shawl, buy this kippah, and you'll be blessed financially. No, that's not how it works. But McShane got it right. And I would love to see the church get it right as we seek to bless those who have blessed us with this and bring it back to them, to the glory of God and the one shepherd and one King, Jesus. I'm going to close in a word of prayer and then Q&A. Have we time for Q&A? Just 5 minutes max. If you have no questions, we're good. But let's just close this section and then we'll have Q&A. Our Father, thank you for what you've given to us. That by your grace, the Jewish gospel came across these shores and reached our ears. Grace abundant, amazing, amazing grace. Thank you for what we have here in the United States. We are so blessed. But, oh gracious God, to whom much has been given, much will be required. And so we pray that you would help us to be wise stewards and help us to have this longing, this belief-driven burden for the ancient people to bring the gospel back to those that brought it to us. Thank you for the fellowship here. Thank you for this church. Thank you that this church believes in preaching the whole counsel of God and in bringing substantial food to the Lord's people Sunday by Sunday. We pray, gracious God, as we are fed, so may we be fed to have a greater grasp of the wonders of redeeming grace and to desire to share that gospel with our friends and our neighbors, Jew and Gentile. And may you give the increase. May you blow upon the dry bones of our Gentile friends and our Jewish friends, to the glory and praise of Christ, our Savior. In his name, amen.